Good morning, afternoon, or evening from wherever you're joining us from. Thank you for joining this webinar covering this webinar is presented by the Clean Energy Solutions Center and the 21st Century Power Partnership. Both are initiatives of the Clean Energy Ministerial. This morning's webinar is covering the power sector as part of the Power Sector Decarbonization Action Plan series, where we posted several webinars to date. And this installment will be exploring the European Union Action Plan. So again, thank you all for joining us. My name is Isabel McCann. I am the team lead for International Partnership Communications at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I am the technical coordinator today. So just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared with attendees. This is a broadcast, so all of our attendees, all of you are automatically muted just to avoid interruptions this morning. We do have a chat feature. I would encourage all of you who are joining us this morning, please take a moment and introduce yourself via the webinar chat. And feel free to add any comments throughout the event there. We do have a specific question and answer tool in the Zoom toolbar. I encourage you all to take a look at that. Please send your questions in at any point during the presentation, and we will have a Q&A and discussion at the end. If you have any technical issues, feel free to chat myself. You can also chat my colleague, Sophie Schrader. Either one of us can try and help you. There is also a Zoom FAQ that is probably more knowledgeable than we can be, but feel free to message either of us if you're having technical issues. You can also adjust your audio through the audio settings in the bottom of your toolbar. If you're having issues with that, there are dial in and listen by phone options in your registration email. And finally, we will be launching a survey when the event ends. It is just a feedback survey because your feedback is highly valuable to us, and it enables us to continue to improve the presentations and events that we host. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it off to our moderator today, Jal Desai from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory.
Thank you, Isabel. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Again, thank you all for joining today's webinar. As Isabel mentioned, this webinar is the fourth part of the Power Sector Decarbonization Action Plan series. I know it's going to be very productive and interesting webinar. And this webinar is brought to you by Clean Energy Solutions Center in partnership with 21st Century Power Partnership, two of the work streams of the Clean Energy Ministerial, along with European Commission. And again, I welcome all the participants and speakers. Again, thank you so much. And again, it's great to see participation from around the world. And please type in your questions in the Q&A section. Next slide, please. So let me give you a rundown of the agenda and speakers for today's webinar. So first, we're going to do a very quick introductory overview about Clean Energy Solutions Center and 21st Century Power Partnership. And you will learn how these initiatives complement other SEM activities. And then we'll dive into the technical presentation from European Union. Next slide, please. Now, let me honor the speakers. Again, my name is Jal Desai. I'm a researcher at the US National Renewable Energy Lab. I'll be giving the overview about Solution Center. I've got my colleague, Pratik Joshi, who is an energy engineer, again, at NROL, who has helped run 21st Century Power Partnership. And then, unfortunately, Paula Pino wasn't able to join the call, but we have her colleague, Peter Harwood, who would be filling in for her. Next, we have Matthew Balu, who is a policy officer, DG Energy, again, at the European Commission. And then we have Michaela Marsko, who's, again, a policy officer at DG Energy. And then we have got Antonio Di Paolo, scientific project officer, Joint Research Center, again, at European Commission. And then last, we have Isabel Kenkwa, scientific project officer, Joint Research Center at European Commission. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let me give a quick overview about the Clean Energy Solutions Center. Next slide. Okay. So as I had mentioned, Clean Energy Solution Center is one of the work streams of the Clean Energy Ministerial. The objective for Solution Center is to accelerate the transition of clean energy market and technologies in developing nation. This initiative or work stream is co-led by US and Australia, and Enroll is the operating agent. And we have got 40 plus external partners and participant organization. And again, we have got 3 services that Solution Center offers. And again, I would like all the attendees to check out the website and the fact sheet that we have. Next slide, please. So the 3 services that Solution Center offers. So the first one is Ask an Expert. So Ask an Expert is designed to help policymakers in developing countries and emerging economies to identify and implement clean energy and finance solutions. We have more than 50 plus experts from over 15 countries, right? And we have responded to 300 plus requests submitted by 90 plus governments since inception. And again, this service is free of cost for developing and emerging economies. The second service, technical and capacity building, is basically delivering presentations and webinars, right? So to date, we have delivered and conducted 300 webinars, training 20,000 public and private sector stakeholders. And usually we have at least 1 or 2 webinars every month on various topics. So if you're interested, please subscribe so you will get the latest information on the schedule. And the last service is resource library. So we have 1,500 curated reports, policy briefs, journals, journal articles on, again, various topics. So again, I would like all the attendees to check out the website. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. With that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Pratik.
Thanks, Jalan. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm sure this will be another great webinar, and I'll just give a quick overview of 21 CPP, starting on the next slide. So the 21st Century Power Partnership, we're another clean energy ministerial work stream, and our mission is to accelerate the transition to clean, efficient, reliable, and cost-effective power systems. So we try to take a holistic view of the power system, not focusing on specific technologies, and I think that's really best embodied through these country action plans. We can go to the next slide. So our annual program of work can include a variety of things. From year to year, we've published many thought leadership studies that you could find on our website that focus on the status of the power system transformation or specific topics like system flexibility. We also work on a multilateral basis and also with specific countries or regions. And so we try to focus on how the best practices for planning, building, and operating power systems, how they're being implemented throughout the world, and how those lessons learned can be shared with other countries. And then finally, we focus on capacity building, workforce development activities such as fellowship programs, study tours, things like that. Next slide, please. So now I just want to briefly highlight what we've been up to over the past couple of years and then discuss where we're moving forward in the next few years. So 2 years ago, or at least a little over a year ago, actually, we released a collaborative report for energy ministers at the Clean Energy Ministerial in Pittsburgh. And this synthesized lessons learned from a variety of different work streams across the ministerial. So we took all of these lessons learned, integrated them into key messages for energy ministers. And then that was very well received. And during the roundtable, it led to this idea of operationalizing these lessons learned into a first cohort of action plans. So we worked with the European Union, and you'll hear from colleagues today, We also worked with India, Chile, Australia, and the United Kingdom, and we are working with more countries and jurisdictions in this upcoming year. And to support the development of these action plans, we've had some technical workshops based on feedback from our member countries. Over the past year, we had a workshop on transmission planning and operations. I can share the link to that video as well in the chat, and then a workshop on resource adequacy and grid flexibility. So planning to have more of those starting in 2024. Next slide. And then, of course, our planned activities for the upcoming year. It's this webinar series to more broadly disseminate the findings of these action plans. So folks that are attending and watching the recording can see, what are the lessons learned from the European Union or other action plan cohort members, and what can be relevant for your own context. We're working with a second set of countries, the United States, Canada, Brazil, and others to release action plans next year in Brazil. And then also planning for more technical workshops, thought leadership reports. And next slide. So yeah, hopefully that was a good rundown of the 21st Century Power Partnership. We'll share all the information as well, but definitely want to save the bulk of this time for the technical presentation from our colleagues. So I think I'll pass it back to Jal and others. Thanks.
Again, thank you so much, Prateek. Now I'll hand it to Peter. Peter, the floor is yours.
Yep, thank you very much, Joe. And good morning and good afternoon to everyone joining this webinar. First, I have to start with an apology because it should have been my director, Paula Pino, talking at this point. Paula is the director for Just Transition, Consumers, Energy, Security, Efficiency, and Innovation. So we have quite a broad portfolio here. However, she has a meeting with the Executive Vice President just now, so she couldn't make it. I'm stepping in for her. I'm a policy officer at the Innovation, Digitalization, Research and Innovation Unit, and I'm also the contact point for the Clean Energy Ministerial at the Commission. So just very briefly, by way of introduction, what we are going to present here. I mean, I also want to comment the initiative by NREL and the TUSEM initiatives. From the onset, we found this a very useful, very helpful initiative that we are happy to join and to put together kind of an action plan, which is a compilation of the EU policies that have been developed in the recent years. The recent years in EU policymaking have been quite turbulent, I must say, with the COVID on the one hand, and then Russia's invasion on Ukraine, that really kind of cut a little bit through our plans, but we did keep to our overall objectives that we will present you lately. What you should also bear in mind that the European Union is, of course, is a complex policy-making system. The EU is composed of 27 EU member states. Energy policy is planned, designed, and implemented in a collaboration across all levels, from the EU level to the national levels to the regional and local levels. So this is what we are presenting here. This is a product of the directives and regulations. And legislation is a collaboration across all these levels. So now jumping in the next slide, please. Jumping into the presentation itself, what you see here on the screen, this is kind of the starting point where we started in 2020. Recently, we have EU renewable policy making has kind of 10 years etaps or periods. This is the starting point for this decade. In 2020, electricity represented some 23% of the final energy consumption in the EU. That was coming from various sources. 39% came from renewable energy generation, more or less corresponding to 1,000 gigawatt hours. 36% came from fossil fuels, and this was the first year actually when renewable generation overpassed that of from fossil fuels, and 25% from nuclear. When you have a look on in more detail on the renewable generation side, you will see that in 2020 most came from wind with 14%. Hydropower represented 13%, biofuel 6%, and solar 5%. However, and that's the blurry image on the left side or graph shows that in the various member states, this energy mix is obviously very different. Some of the EU member states energy mix and power mix is still dominantly fossil fuel based. It's natural gas or coal. In some of the others, you have a fairly even mix between fossils, nuclear, and renewables, and some of them have really moved towards where we all are aspiring to, is to a power system dominated by wind, hydro, or eventually solar. Next slide, please. So in 2020, and actually just before when the previous cycle ended, and the new Commission and Commission President von der Leyen took office, a new legislative program was adopted, the European Green Deal, that set for objective for the EU to reach climate neutrality by 2050. In 2021, this objective has been set in EU law by the European Climate Law, which makes for the bloc legally binding to reach the 2050 climate neutrality objective. And immediately, still in the same year, we adopted the so-called Fit for 55 package, which was a comprehensive legislative program for the 5 years of the European Commission in all various areas that are relevant and then that can contribute to reaching this objective. For 2030, the EU is aspiring to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 55%, and that portfolio of policies that you see in the beehive, measures under those policies are meant to help us to get there where we want to be by 2030. This is not exclusively power, of course. That includes a lot of areas, but also the energy efficiency and renewables and the electricity market design. Next slide, please. However, of course, while all this has been set, then came the unforeseeable and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine by Russia that has completely turned upside down the global energy markets and had very direct impact on the EU energy markets, of course, creating shortages of gas, and a major component of steel of the EU energy mix, and of course increasing significantly, dramatically the energy prices and electricity prices across the EU. So soon after the invasion in March 2022, the EU leaders agreed in the European Council to phase out Europe's dependency on Russian energy imports as soon as possible, and they adopted the REPowerEU Plan that has become the cornerstone of EU energy policy. And the REPowerEU Plan put the clean energy transition right at the heart of the European energy security. And actually, this was a paradigmatic change at all levels. With this, the perception of renewable projects have changed, really. Renewable energy from now on is really seen as kind of a reliable and affordable energy, which is very often more reliable and more affordable than energy coming from fossil fuels. So deploying more new wind and solar capacities did become a major energy security priority for the EU. And in last year, we did see this happening on the ground too. It was a record year in terms of deploying wind and solar capacities, new capacities in the EU. Some of the figures you can see there on the slides, some 16 gigawatt of wind power generation was deployed last year, which is a 34% increase on the previous year. 41 gigawatt new solar power generation capacity added. 60% of those rooftop. The rooftop market was really booming last year throughout the year, and as well as 1 gigawatt from other renewable resources. One should add that the heat pumps market increased really significantly last year too. The take up was like 40% compared to 2021. Next slide, please. And here we come to the kind of the long-term view. The graph you say is the EU's Joint Research Center's 1.5 scenario, and how it would affect the power generation system by 2050 and mix. Clearly, the solar and wind capacities must increase even compared to the recent deployment trends significantly. At the same time, unabated coal and fossil fuel-based generation should be phased out towards the end of the 30s. And of course, maybe the third element that is striking in this graph that we are expecting that the demand for power and clean power will increase due to the electrification of various sectors of the economy, like transportation and also heating. So while we are decarbonizing and getting rid of from the fossil sources, we also have to increase the overall generation capacity. That would have been my introduction, and then we will go and see some of these policies more in detail, and I'm passing the floor to the next speaker. Matthew, please.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. Matthew Balu. I work in the team dealing with renewable energy policy, and I'll start from where Peter stopped, with a specific focus first on wind and then on solar power. Peter mentioned the numbers. Wind power represents about 1/3 of renewable electricity in the EU, and by 2030, wind power is expected to supply 1/3 of all the EU's electricity. So in order to get there, we need a significant acceleration of deployment. We need to multiply our wind generation capacity by 2.5 over the next years. We presented ambitious numbers in our 2020 strategy on wind and offshore renewables, and we are already installing record numbers, but we need to accelerate further. We see a particularly dynamic development in the offshore sector right now. In January this year, EU countries agreed on new ambitious long-term goals for the deployment of offshore renewables in each of the EU's 5 sea basins. And the combined figures give an overall ambition of approximately 111 gigawatts of renewable generation capacity by 2030, offshore renewables. For onshore wind, we talk about some 400 gigawatt in total that would be installed by 2030. So of course, it's a challenge to deliver this in such a tight time frame. Also because the EU wind manufacturing industry has faced difficulties in operating its business. All the largest wind turbine manufacturers reported significant losses in 2022. So as a policy response, in October this year, the European Commission presented a wind power package with additional measures to deliver that acceleration. So increased predictability on auction calendars and volumes, for instance, in the next years, and faster permitting, elements on improved auction design to reduce the pressure on prices only, elements on access to finance, on creating a fair and competitive international development, on skills, the skill bottleneck, which goes across all technologies, and a wind charter bringing together the industry and member states' commitments. So most of the commitments adopted in this new action plan will be implemented immediately or in the next weeks and months. Next slide, please. Then on solar energy. In 2022, as part of our REPower package, the reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Commission presented a solar strategy with several objectives. The first one is, like for wind, accelerate deployment of solar, the large-scale deployment, which is based on renewables auctions, on power purchase agreements, but also decentralized rooftop deployment. Peter mentioned that 60% of the volume last year was rooftop. This is linked to self-consumption as well, which we are promoting, and to elements related to building codes, where we are currently discussing the introduction of solar mandates to make new buildings ready for solar, and that's increasingly new and existing buildings should incorporate solar, starting with public buildings, with industry, and moving to new private buildings. We're working also on faster permitting for procedures. I'll get back to it, and bottlenecks for the skills. We also addressed the sustainability of the supply chain. What is at stake for the EU is to diversify imports and, of course, scale up EU manufacturing. This goes through, for instance, increased sustainability requirements for PV systems sold in the EU. Another dimension is to make sure that the value for EU citizens is there. So use PV to address energy poverty, promote energy communities, so collective approaches to investment in renewables. So all of this together will allow us to address these various objectives. Next, please. The main piece of legislation on renewables is the Renewable Energy Directive. And we just finished a major revision of this whole framework, which entered into force 10 days ago. So it's really a game changer in the EU energy landscape, because first of all, it increases substantially the level of our renewable energy ambition. Over the past 9 years, our understanding of what is technically and politically feasible in terms of renewables development towards 2030 has completely changed. And we've basically, with a new EU target of 42.5% renewables in our whole economy, so we're not talking just about electricity, but overall energy consumption, that level of ambition has basically doubled. So the pace of deployment between today and 2030 will double compared to our original targets of 32% that was in place until now. Next to that overall target, this new policy framework includes sub-targets for renewables in various sectors, in heating and cooling, in industry, in transport, in buildings. So pressure from several entry points to make sure that the renewables potential deployment, but also from the end users, is maximized across all sectors. So as we are talking specifically about the power sector decarbonization, the important thing there is that this framework will facilitate electrification in different sectors. We're talking heat pumps in the heating sector, direct electrification of industry processes. It will also facilitate what we call energy system integration. So making our energy system more efficient, facilitate the integration of renewable energy. For instance, there are new elements in this law to allow storage, smart charging, district heating systems to play an active role and provide flexibility to that power system, which will be largely based on variable renewables. There are also new provisions on integrated planning, on real-time information on the energy mix, and so on. Permitting procedures, of course, will be also easier and faster. Next to this, we're strengthening our system of guarantees of origin to also increase the transparency on the availability of renewables, and promoting renewable hydrogen as the last piece of that energy system, decarbonized energy system of the future. So now, of course, it's about a fast and strong implementation of this revised framework. As Peter said, we're dealing with very different national situations. So these are common elements that have to be adapted to each national context. Next slide, please. My last point will be focusing on permitting. Big bottleneck, and with this revised renewables law, we address this issue in a comprehensive manner through spatial planning, simplification, and shortening of procedures. So permitting procedures will be easier and faster, both for renewable energy projects, but also for the necessary infrastructure projects to integrate these additional renewables into the electricity system. Moreover, renewable energy will benefit from an overriding public interest presumption to avoid some of the time spent in legal procedures, while preserving a high level of environmental protection. The revised directive also calls for the creation of so-called renewable acceleration areas, which were earlier in the process called go-to areas, where renewable energy projects can go ahead very fast with even shorter deadlines and streamlined environmental assessments per project. These are the areas where the impact is deemed to be lower, because, for instance, these are very artificialized areas, former industrial sites, and so on. So with this, we really plan to deliver that accelerated deployment and the new renewables target. Thank you. Now I'll hand over to our next speaker, Michaela.
Thank you, Mathieu. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on from which part of the world you're connecting today. So Mathieu introduced some of the very key elements of the EU policy on renewables, and I take over to, let's say, talk about the natural next steps. So how do we make sure that the energy which is produced by the renewables get actually transported where is needed? And so I will focus now my presentation on the EU policy on energy infrastructures. So let's start by saying that as the backbone of our energy system, electricity grids are critical for the clean energy transition. And Europe has the most interconnected and resilient energy grid in the world, which really brings electricity to consumers every morning, hours, and day of the year. This said, what is particularly important in Europe, what is maybe peculiar for our EU energy policy on infrastructures, it really focuses on this cross-border element. So interconnectors are, in a way, the arteries of the EU energy system, allowing energy to flow seamlessly across the borders, ensuring security of supply, and very importantly, the integration of renewable energy. The EU cross-border energy system has changed and has developed really significantly in the last 30 years, and in particular through the modernized 10E energy policy. So the 10 energy policy is the Trans-European Networks for Energy policy, and is based on one of the cornerstones of the EU policy on infrastructures, which is the so-called 10E regulation, so new regulation on guidelines for trans-European energy infrastructures. This regulation, as we said, has been in place since 2013 and has really supported the creation of this European circulatory system. But as required, let's say, has gone through several changes to be more adapt to what are the new EU objectives with regard to decarbonizations. So in 2022, the European Commission adopted a new regulations. And this new regulation has, of course, a focus on renewable, a focus on new category of infrastructures to support the decarbonization objective of Europe, to bring us towards a climate neutral economy powered by the clean energy. These infrastructure categories are in particular offshore, hydrogens, electrolyzers, smart gas grids, as well as smart electricity grids, CO2 networks, and energy storage. Of course, the electricity transmissions remains one of the key infrastructure categories, while there are two other categories, which is on cross-border infrastructure for natural gas and oil, which are no more part of the TEN-E regulation. So the updated TEN-E regulation does not foresee infrastructures in these areas. Next slide. So how does the TEN-E works? The TEN-E works by supporting the Europe decarbonization through projects of common interest. So this project of common interests are selected starting from a process which is identified, which is called the 10-year network development plan. So this process, every 2 years, the European networks of the European transmission system operators for electricity and gas publish a non-binding EU-wide 10 years network development plan. So this is a truly collaborative effort. What happens is that TSOs come together and they build on their national and regional investment plans to come up with what is actually a European plan for the development of the networks. The TYNDP is also consulted with stakeholders who can contribute to their elaborations through workshop and meetings and a series of occasions. And the final, let's say the result, the main product of this process is what is called the high-level report on TYNDP, which stands for, of course, 10 years network development plan. The latest report was published in January 2023, and it includes a series of scenario analysis, system needs analysis, and project assessment. So the projects, among the projects which are assessed as beneficial, necessary, and absolutely key for the European system, and they are included in the TYNDP, these projects can also apply to become a project of common interest under the TEN-E regulations. Next slide, please. So projects of common interest are, as I say, the key tool, the key elements for the implementation of the infrastructure policy of the EU. They are key infrastructure projects that are aimed at completing the European energy market and ensuring all the benefits that we have described below. The project which are selected and become PCIs can benefit from many advantages stemming from being part of the Trans-European Network for Energy, including, for example, very importantly, an accelerated permit granting, improved regulatory treatment, the possibility to apply for financial support under the Connecting Europe Facility for Energy, which has a total budget of 5.8 billion. They also benefit from dedicated rules to facilitate the development of offshore grids and in general strengthen cross-sectoral energy infrastructure planning. So there are specific measures, specific let's say policy elements which are put in place to support these projects. So in order, as I said, in order to be eligible for be included in the PCI list, the project needs to be first be identified as one of the elements of the TYNDP. I think this is a particularly interesting moment for this webinar. In a sense, we are lucky because a lot has happened in the past few days. So on Tuesday, the European Commission adopted the first list of PCIs under the new TENI regulation. This list includes 166 projects, which are across all the categories that I mentioned before. And this project will now be able to benefit from all the special measures that you can see now on the screen on my slide. Another very interesting element is that of our policy on infrastructure has also been adopted last Tuesday, and is the EU Action Plan for Grids. So recognizing, as we said, the role of grids as the backbone of the EU energy system, there is also recognition that more needs to be done to develop the grids further and faster. And so the action plan identifies a measure to speed up the development of the grids as it will be necessary to achieve our goals. This is not part of the slide, but I will then pass a couple of links to some facts and figures in the chat. Thank you very much, and I'll pass the floor to Antonio for the continuation of the presentation.
Thank you, Michela. Antonio De Paola from JRC here. Good morning or good afternoon to everybody attending the workshop. So in the next few slides, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what is going on in terms of EU electricity markets. Of course, let me start by saying that when we talk about EU electricity market, in reality, we refer to different schemes and mechanisms that you can see here in the figure that span over different time scales and perform different functions. In principle, each of these specific markets could be implemented different in each member state. So as you can imagine, the topic is very broad, very complex, but I'll try to summarize in the next 5-6 minutes some of the take-home messages. So first of all, let me state that the harmonization and integration of the EU electricity markets is a process that started quite some time ago, 1996, and is still proceeding in the latest years. For example, last year, the coupling of the day-ahead and intraday markets was completed. At the same time, we are working on the creation on common market platforms such as Picasso, Mari, and Terre for the exchange of reserve and frequency response services. Why I'm mentioning this? Because of course, harmonization and integration of the markets corresponds to improved efficiency and therefore to benefits for customers in the EU. What I included here is some recent result from Acer study, which estimated the benefits as about 1 billion per year, just to give you an order of magnitude. So significant progress has already been made, but at the moment we are facing new and significant challenges. In the short term, I mean, we have seen the energy crisis, the war in Ukraine, which has significantly changed the market landscape, and at the same time we have to face long-term challenges which mainly derive from the ambitious decarbonization target that Europe has set out and the resulting increasing large-scale penetration of renewables. For this reason, the European Commission has set out a proposal for revising the electricity market design, and what you can see here on the right is some of the main objectives that this proposal aims to achieve. In particular, one of the main points is the protection of consumers and industry from high energy prices. Related to this, we have a reduction of the influence of fossil fuels on final electricity prices. We also want to limit the impact of price volatility. And last but not least, we want to increase the amount of flexibility resources that we have available to support renewable integration and operate the system in a safe and efficient way. So in the next two slides, in the next two slides, I'm going to give you some examples of the actions that are being proposed, starting with the protection and empowerment of consumers. In the figure on the left, you can see the effect of the energy measures that Europe has taken to lower retail prices in the last 2 years as a result of the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine. So, as you can see, their impact has been positive and significant. However, now we are at the point where we need to think about long-term structural changes that make this saving permanent. One of the possible approaches is to introduce the right to fixed price contracts in addition to dynamic price contracts, introduce some form of regulation for retail prices, for example, in specifying some price caps in case of crisis, particularly for households and small medium enterprises. Then the second point I mentioned earlier about decoupling the price of electricity from the price of fossil fuels. And we think there are two main instruments that can allow us to do that. The first one is power purchase agreements. And for that, we need streamlined legislation and some instruments that can cover financial risks. At the same time, the second instrument is the use of two-way contracts for differences, which can represent an effective support schemes for new investment. And we also need to think about the appropriate redistribution mechanism of the market revenues. Third point on this theme is to improve the liquidity of forward markets that at the moment are still split at a regional level and exhibit significant differences in terms of liquidity among each others. You can see here the churn factor, basically an indicator of liquidity and how it changes from one region to the other. Next. Then the third point I mentioned was about flexibility resources. So as you know, as we put in the system more and more renewables, we increase the level of uncertainty and variability that we need to deal with in the European system. Therefore, it is fundamental to procure an increased amount of flexibility resources. In the graph on the left here, you can see a recent study by Acer that quantifies the daily and weekly, yearly flexibility needs in 2025 and 2030. If we focus just on the daily flexibility needs, you can see a 30% increase in just 5 years. So how do we procure this extra flexibility? Well, we have some options. First of all, we think we should define national objectives for demand response and storage technologies. We should consider the application of support schemes that are specifically designed and aimed to non-fossil sources of flexibility. And then we also think that system operators should have a clearer role in this, for example, through the introduction of new products such as peak shaving, increased transparency, and revised network tariffs. So these first 3 points gives you an idea of the significant changes that are going to occur in the European market. And of course, as we go through these changes, it is of paramount importance that we monitor what is going on. We make sure that all the market actors and participants are behaving according to the set out rules. And for this, we are considering improving the process of collecting inside information and market transparency, enhance the supervision of the reporting parties, and also envisaging a stronger role for Acer, in particular in the investigation of significant cross-border anomalies. That's all on my side. I'll give the floor to my colleague Isabel.
Hey, Isabel, I don't know if it's just me, but I don't think we can hear you.
Now you can hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks. Oh, thanks for this opportunity. Hello, everyone. I'm the last one in this nice presentation, but I'm gonna deep a bit in the engagement of citizens in this energy transition and the digitalization of the decarbonization section. And first of all, I'm going to explain you the smart metering deployment in Europe, because the introduction of smart metering is one of the core elements in Europe policies, targeting the engagement of citizens, the environmental sustainability, and achieving some digitalization in the energy markets. For more than 10 years, Europe has been progressively setting some policies to this smart metering rollouts. And you can see some results in this slide. On the figure on the left, you can see data from 2020, where we have 123 million smart meters already installed among all the member states in Europe. For example, Italy or Spain have already achieved a massive deployment in those countries. But in total, we have more or less 43% of the electricity consumers. And well, the goal is to achieve almost the 80% for next year, for 2024. And of course, to engage the end users and the consumers, we need the support of the distribution system operators. And so they have already started this smart meters rollout. And you can see on the figure on the right that 95% of this DSO have already started implementing. Well, depending on the country or on the DSO, but you can see an enormous effort to achieve this digitalization of the market, electricity market. And these data are from the Observatory of the Distribution System Operator realized by the Joint Research Center I work for. And well, that directives were quite important to this massive deployment. Next slide, please. So after having some data and some digitalization in the end consumers, and always with the aim of engaging citizens, European Union not only supported the installation of self-consumption, but also a new figure is created, the energy community. My colleague Matthew already mentioned before, because mainly it's based on photovoltaics technology. And it is a new figure, a new entity, enables citizens to have a main role in the electricity market. And it is something to engage people, to engage consumers, and they can also receive some revenues or some benefits from the electricity grid. And in this framework, the last spring, European Union policy made a new further step, was a new right for the European citizens. And this new right is the right to share your own energy, because it's not only an operator or a corporation able to produce and to share energy, it is also citizens. And to achieve that, it was made in the reform of the electricity market. And so now consumers have the right to inject their own electricity and to have some revenues. And to achieve that, they need to have their data collected and validated by the operators. So it is somehow connected with the previous slide with a smart metering deployment in Europe. We have some figures on the right on this slide with different schemes, because you can share the owner of the installation, or you can make easier the investment for private companies, or you can only see if you have some excess in your production, you can just have some benefits in your electrical invoice. And last, I would like to point you to links that are on the bottom. First of all, the Energy Communities Repository. It is a website in the European Union website where you can find a lot of information about energy communities, and you can have how a community can be created or managed, and especially dedicated for urban areas. So we have another initiative always in our website with some use case and some pilots, especially dedicated for rural areas. So yeah, energy communities, it's somehow making the citizen and the end consumers a main role in the energy transition. And of course, to decarbonize the power system. And that's all from my side. I'll pass the floor to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Joel, I don't think we can hear you either.
How about now? Can you?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Again, apologies. Again, thank you so much, all of the speakers. It is very interesting and very informative to know what EU is doing to decarbonize the power sector. I would like all of the panelists and or the speakers to turn on their. In interest of time, we might have time for a question or two. So let's see, I believe there was a question in the chat, and looks like Matthew, you have you answered that question. And it looks like there's another one, and this might be more for Isabel. So there's a question: can you share more information on smart meters? So if there are any links, please feel free to share that with our attendees. The other question.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I couldn't turn on my micro. Yes, I can put in the chat some information, and of course it is able to deep a bit in these reports and the observatory that I already mentioned. It is quite interesting from the side of the distribution system operators, and more or less it depending on the country, on the goal of achieving of its member state, but I think the link is always useful to deep a bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabel. And this is a perfect segue to my next question. So again, there's so many policies, right? Have you encountered any situation where certain policies, right, benefit certain member states? And if so, how these challenges can be overcome? Peter or anyone else?
Sorry, Joe, can you repeat? I haven't got the first part of the question.
Sure. So have you encountered situation where potential or ongoing EU energy policy benefits certain member states over others? And if so, how do you overcome those challenges?
That's maybe I start and colleagues from the other policy units can complement. This is, of course, always a critical part of EU policymaking is finding the balance of in between the different situations in the various member states. And EU legislation is must work all across the 27 member states. So the negotiations in between the member states and the EU institutions are meant to kind of balance this the differences. And they have to produce value and and kind of good dynamics and the required effect and impact all across the EU geography, basically. So it's a very, very delicate balancing act, as I tried to show in one of my first figures, that the energy mix in this in the different EU member states is very different. Some based on nuclear, some on coal, the others on natural gas or renewables. So the starting points are very different, but we have to head towards the same direction, the same targets, and we have to take into account these differences. Maybe I pass on to Matthew to complement.
Thanks, Peter. Yes. First, the one thing that is important to remember is that the EU, as decision-making body and as policymaker, is also not a monolithic entity, but that all the laws that are adopted at EU level are the result of a process of negotiation, and are endorsed, have gone through negotiations between these 27 member states as well. And then typically what we are doing with our legislation is that when we're setting targets, they include sufficient flexibility that they can be adapted to each national context. So for instance, we don't prescribe the energy mix of each individual country, but establish targets for renewable energy overall, where member states can design what is best adapted to their context. And in general, targets are supported with measures which are usually common principles that help investors reduce the administrative and legal burden in case they want to develop projects in various countries, but also leave sufficient leeway to be adapted to each national situation, and measures that are basically toolboxes for our member states to help deliver these targets. So that's a bit how it works.
This is helpful, and I know we have 2 minutes over. We'll take one more question from the chat. So with the emphasis on wind, solar, and energy security, what are the plans for supporting long duration energy storage through mandates, incentives, and market frameworks?
Maybe I can start on storage. So no legal requirements, but last year the European Commission produced a set of recommendation and guidance documents on storage in general, including long duration energy storage. And we are currently working on the revision of our electricity market design, with some objectives on improving our resistance to short-term variations of electricity prices, for instance, but also to better reward flexibility services to the energy system. So storage is one of the elements, and so elements in discussions are how to better reward through specific market design those flexibility services.
Anyone else would like to chime in?
Maybe just to start the second part of the answer, and maybe Michaela will want to chip on that, because the other solution for that is interconnections in between EU member states. The EU for a long time, and this is really part of the 10E regulation and the PCIs that Michaela just presented. So interconnections in between the EU member states are meant to increase the flexibility of the system and to basically to drive the electrons from places where they are generated towards the places where they are used. And very often it happens in the EU that this is happening on cross-border by crossing borders. So these interstate interconnections they are also meant to provide the flexibilities, and in that sense the storage across the EU electricity system.
Michaela, would you like to add anything?
No, actually, nothing very, I think not very much, because thanks to Peter, he has already made a very valid point on interconnections. Maybe what I can say is that in this context of bringing energy for the places where it's produced to wherever is necessary in Europe through the whole network and interconnectors across border, I think I would like maybe to highlight the point which I made during my presentation on offshore grids. So when we're talking of wind, I think we have a big renewed emphasis on offshore. We recognize this as a massive potential across all the sea basin around Europe, and so the on top of course promoting the development of offshore renewables, so from a generation side, the new 10E really has a focus on the offshore infrastructure, so whatever is necessary to connect the generation to the land in this case. I think what's interesting in this context is also that the 10E has, let's say, it set up also some support in terms of planning for this network, but in general on the whole offshore planning. And I think this is really maybe is a bit of a novelty compared to the regulatory framework before.
Right. Again, I know we are 6 minutes over time. Again, thank you all the speakers and the attendees. And again, we will post the recording and share the presentation on the Clean Energy Solutions Center. But again, I would like to echo again, thank you so much for sharing this information. With that, I'd like to hand it to Isabel to close the webinar.
Thanks, Joel. Yes, just thank you to everyone for joining. Up here, you'll see there are QR codes to the Solution Center site and the 21 CPP site. We will be disseminating the recording as well as the presentation materials within the next 48 hours or so to everyone who joined. So thank you all, and have a great week. And thank you to our presenters and our moderator.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.